What is up, down, and sideways, all you beautiful individuals? It is another Rapid League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you guys for our first installment of the Global Power Rankings for 2026. And yes, I think you could deem this way, I'll drop 3 ways too early to be doing one of these. The LCS hasn't even kicked off yet. Some LEC teams have played. Well, all LEC teams have played 3 games total, but that just means the volatility and toxicity is at full steam ahead this early.
I'm gonna go ahead and subtract one of those ways. I'm only going with way too early on this power ranking for the global scale because I think it is, yes, absolutely a very early one. You don't have a lot of games to be going off of and you know what you're taking off of here. But you do look at the calendar and realize that first stand is going to happen quicker than you think it's going to appear. And so you absolutely want to lay down a baseline for the international table and what you're looking at. And so you can set it and then have some of this movement as we move closer to the event. But absolutely excited to jump in and get this list started here this year.
And case in point, really, to flesh this thing out, because we're not feeling confident with a lot of squads, you got some LCS teams who have yet to make that debut. This is probably most people's top 3 heading into the year. Lion just saying they, quote-unquote, won the offseason. Team Liquid had a kind of bad Kespiel run, and Cloud9 had an okay Kespiel run, so we'll tentatively put them ahead of the other 2 for now.
And this is somewhat of the understanding with a way too early global power ranking scale is that you're going to have to make some type of guesstimation like this where it is simply more or less a placeholder type of situation where I'm looking at these 3 where I think, do we really believe that these 3 are going to end the year in this top 20 type of situation? I don't really think so, but absolutely hoping for 2 out of 3 of these squads to hold their type of position in at least this top 20, and who knows, possibly climbing even further, but at the very least, hold them in this placeholder type of spot right now before we get underway in the LCS.
Remember, FlyQuest peak last year was cracking the top 10 pretty consistently. Now, I don't think we're going to have a number 1 team in the LCS that's far ahead of everybody else like we did last year, but who knows? We can at least believe. The LCP has only played like a single week. The CFO era is over. They dropped their very first series, so definitely not going undefeated when they lost Honkyu and Jinjia. Obviously, Team Secret Wales are sitting at 2-0, and I've said it multiple times, I'm too high on LNG, but we're putting them on this list because it was another series win.
They've at least are benefiting, right, from the early schedule and from playing and putting together this type of record that you do want to put them in this conversation. It's still very much a buyer beware situation for some of these guys that you will be talking about where, do you believe the recent track record or do you think that there's a little bit more to discover underneath the surface? I feel like LNG, there's still a little bit more under the surface for some of these teams to figure out before they start to really dial into their matches.
And they're really only here, yes, because it's early and because that middle 5 onwards in the LPL are full of multiple question marks, which is why a squad like LNG can be in here. We got 3 LEC teams on this list. Fnatic, the bottom of the trio, and that's, well, they had a 8K gold lead thrown by Na'Vi for one of their wins, and even the win against Las Bretones, you could say there was a bit of a throw from LR. So 2 throws are the main reason why a Fnatic has these 2 wins. Now, anytime there's a throw, there is obviously a comeback mechanic and good play out of the team that did it. So we still give them their stripes.
Yeah, they do get a couple of points here in those regards, but absolutely, again, as I said in the last type of statement about LNG, buyer beware on Fnatic at this situation because, yes, you're buying into those wins. You're buying into that record that you've got right now in a good starting position, which, again, we know how important, not only in any region, but really in the LEC and how quickly things will ramp up and where you can find yourselves on the wayside if you don't have this good first week. So, yes, you can buy in on that if you're in on Fnatic. But for me, I'm cautious. I'm cautious with my spending right now in the LEC, and I think that you can put your power ranking dollars elsewhere when you're looking at the Europe region.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to fluctuate so much when next week they're literally doubling the amount of games that all the squads will have played. So it's hard to have confidence in any of them this early. And anytime you're doing these early season rankings, it's hard. Some teams, are kind of carrying over what they were in 2025, especially these kind of legacy teams. But G2 is one of them that did not get the bump up here, even though they bounced back in their final game. Their first two games were so bad you couldn't possibly put them on here after week one. Of course, G2 is going to be on this list eventually.
And it was more of a return to form, yes, to close out the week 4 G2. But yeah, you're absolutely right when you're talking about a squad that should have had the benefits, should have had that extra momentum carry over from last year's ranking, ultimately dropping some duds to start out the year. It practically feels like with some of those mistakes that came through, looking at Caps individually with the TP, and you're talking about Labrov with the consecutive failure type of situation that we talked about, it was almost as if G2 wasn't ready for the year to start until this third match of the week type of thing rolls around. They do right the ship, and I think it is enough positive signs in there and enough that you're looking at the next couple of matches and where things change as far as their scheduling, not having Movistar Koi and things like that. Yes, you can look at a G2 on the bounce back on that return in this next week in the LEC.
And I think another squad on this list that has kind of carried some of that momentum and credit that they built up in 2025 is KT Rolster. Because even being on this list, based purely on 2026, you're talking about a needed 3 games, series win over the DN Supers, and getting completely turbo-gapped by Gen G in 2 straight games. So not exactly a huge body of work, but these are the world finalists from last year, 3/5 of them at the very least. So we gave KT a little bit of leeway and still think they're going to be a playoff caliber team in the LCK.
At the very least, one of the important things, and probably to me the most important factor for KT Rolster to verify whether they will be one of these competitive teams, whether they will be a mainstay in this territory or area of the power rankings, is BDD. And if BDD is able to be at the level that he was at last year, where, again, amazing effort, Atlas holding up the world for KT Rolster, we're seeing a similar type of effort from him already to start out this year. And yes, it doesn't come through in the miraculous upset against Gen G. I think there's only a couple of those that you can scratch off your lottery card at a time, and we're still on the refresh period from last year. But BDD playing the way that he has early is that positive sign, is that number one big check mark that you needed to see from KT Rolster to believe that you will have a chance at contention and being competitive this year.
The last 2 squads on this are the 2 EU ones that I'm confident probably won't slip out of this top 20. And you could argue that Carmine Corp, they didn't really have a bad game. They were the most consistent across the 3 games of the weekend in Europe. But because Koi won that direct head-to-head and gave them their only loss, you put them ahead even though they had a dud of a game against Shifters later. These are, I think, clearly a top 2 as you can have after 3 best of ones.
I'm going to call Carmine Corp walking by a bakery, right? You're just walking by and you get that smell of all the fresh pastries, the croissant. Oh, it's perfect. I can't wait to visit Paris for Carmine Corp. But then you maybe enter into the store and you go, wait, this is day-old bread. I was smelling the bread from the store next over type of situation where they've got the fresh Spanish egg custards of Movistar Koi. And I think that's kind of the way it goes, where you're feeling good initial impressions and kind of surroundings about Carmine Corp, but you're still waiting for, I think, the actual result, the product to be a little bit sharper when you're talking about specifically, for me, Khalees and Busio as that pairing down in the bottom lane. I still think there's a lot of potential, a lot of just comfort left to be scratched on this for this group and for that duo specifically when I'm talking about Carmine Corp and how much they can improve. And then when you're looking at Movistar Koi, there's my perfectly baked Spanish egg custard tart right there. Beautiful dessert for us right now. Jojo Pyun starting out the year the way that he has so far in El Yoya, you love to see those things for Movistar Koi.
Unfortunately, the custard was still a bit raw at the bottom when you got to, their last match of the weekend. But still, a single best of one, and I'm I'm pretty sure both of these squads will be hanging out in the top 20 for the majority of split number 1. We roll into that top 10 and things get a little messy, like spilled chili on the floor kind of messy, because I am not confident in basically 10 to 6 and like the entire bottom half of this board, starting with a winless squad. Talk about having carryover and potential having a big impact. That is the 0-2, 1-4 overall Hanwha Life. At least they took a game off of T1, but obviously we are banking on this team not just being top 10, but a top 5 squad in the world.
It's absolutely bonkers to have this type of statement, to have to make these type of concessions about a squad as talented, as loaded as Hanwha Life is right now. But that's just the way that the scheduling has worked out and the results at this point early in the LCK, that you do have to have this type of conversation, not only with yourselves, but with the community type of thing like this, when you are talking about a team like Hanwha Life and the expectations around them after an off-season acquiring Gumayushi, Kanavi coming over. Yeah, certainly in that type of territory, and one that absolutely the expectations are much higher in these power rankings. But one of these ones where you have to have some consequence, has to be some type of penalty for these, falterings. But absolutely one of the ones where you can still see the signs that the talent is going to be there for this team. It's a matter of figuring out the exact formula for them and how they want to approach a lot of these games and these situations, and then dial it out from there. But I've got faith that we will see a Hanwha Life that will climb up in this ranking sooner rather than later.
And you already saw signs of it. It looked like they were well on their way to beat down Nongshim with an insanely fed Aatrox for Kanavi, but Nongshim comes back and end up getting the 2-0, which is why they're ahead of them on this list. And how about Scout having a resurgent start to this season, not just the Hanwha series, but most series so far? I don't know if it's having Calyx behind him waiting to get the start, but he has basically had games better than he did all of last year on JDG.
And it's wild because you would have thought all of the conversation throughout the offseason would have been enough, but I think this guy needed just one little extra push off the cliff, and that was having an absolute dud in the debut game for Nongshim, where everyone was starting to bring up the conversation and having the questions of whether you are washed, whether it should have been Calyx in that starting position. And now we've got the answer of some vintage Scout level of performances, and certainly ones that have elevated the level of this Nongshim team to a different degree, one where they are envisioning getting maybe a little bit ahead of themselves and thinking about that top-end competition in the LCK. But if Scout performs like this and you are getting these vintage performances, then yes, this is a conversation that you can have about Nongshim.
Despite the recent loss to D+, ahead of schedule in terms of where Nongshim fits in the LCK right now. A couple LPL squads around Nongshim, IG at 9 and JDG at 7. Again, very tricky to rank. IG has beaten JDG, their only series loss so far, but then you see IG struggle mightily against this, new look top esports. They completely throw a game. They need like 35, 45 minutes to close out this series, and it's messy. So IG, you still see the potential, but the potential is higher so far for JDG.
Yeah, but this feels a lot like a roller coaster that you can see off the distance in the highway, and you're going, oh my gosh, you see the heights of these things that it's going to? Holy cow. You don't realize how low that it can possibly get down to, and I feel like that's going to be the Invictus Gaming ride this year. I will say at the very least, some bounce back performances from Rookie individually is an important one to keep track of as far as when you're talking about the power of this one, and specifically the power of this year's Invictus Gaming and what they're going to be able to do with this roster. Rookie being that icon, being that stable presence that we know him to be in the LPL is going to be a requirement if IG is going to find themselves in this type of position next week, the week after type of situation when you're looking at them in the LPL.
And absolutely a good bounce back, because my man was a pylon in the matchup against BLG for what Knight was doing to him.
Yeah, I mean, again, we just talked about Scout having some vintage performances, dialing it back again. Rookie does the same in this one, and certainly some guys that were needing a response back into the positive performance category, so good for them.
In the 6th spot, another undefeated LCK squad still. I am 2-0, nothing to write home about, but BNK Fearex, and I mean, this is a squad that's an example. I know the LCK Cup format is kind of weird, but once you actually get to playoffs, these aren't just teams that Hanwha Life can steamroll to get back to, that top 3 status. Nongshim and especially BNK have proven like they're legit.
They've clearly shown that they're not the floor, right? You are not the basement of the LCK. You are a level that has risen above. And whether it's going to be this answer of, no, the big hammer comes down from the elite squads of the LCK and says, you're not ready, or it is going to be one of these times where they crack on through, they cause disruption within that established order that we expect at the LCK at the very top. So far, we have seen enough signs from this BNK team that you can find avenues, find angles that you can bet on or be convinced of are going to be enough to be a challenge for these top teams in the LCK. And I think overall, at the beginning of the year, that is absolutely mission accomplished for a squad like BNK.
Maybe the only thing you're a little more confident on in this list is the top 5. Because the top 5, at least 4 of these teams, I'm expecting to be hanging out here most of the time. Again, we allude to what Hanwha Life can do. This is a squad that should be within that top 5. But when they have somebody like D plus Kia who's lighting things up right now, and I know Nongshim has been their stiffest competition yet, but absolutely took care of business even though it needed 3 games. Game 3 was very convincing. Showmaker is in that Kespa Cup form, and we're seeing the communication and the macro out of this team already reach levels that we rarely saw all of last year.
I'm a flat out say we never saw it last year.
Probably
man.
Never.
From a squad like D plus Kia, so yeah, very much so happy to talk about them in this position, but I will be cautious and I will warn people that we have seen an all of a sudden reborn, renewed D plus Kia at the beginning of almost every year, and at some point it falters away or it ultimately proves to not be at that top tier level of the LCK. So I think that's where I'm a little bit cautious about them in this type of top 5 territory, placeholder type of vibes for what could be a Hanwha Life as they start to figure things out, hopefully in the LCK. But yeah, credits to D plus Kia. What we have seen from them so far, getting this type of spot and getting this record that they have done so far, only taking care of the business that they have to, given the way that the LC Cup schedule is. But yes, you have seen the good performances out of Showmaker and good vibes from him, which is always something that we check in with D plus Kia. And I think the most important one that you wanted to check off for this team heading into this year was smashed down in the bottom lane, giving you an angle, giving you an option that can push and contend with the top tier ADCs that you will come across in the LCK. And I think so far, mission accomplished from Smash in these early games.
Just before them, obviously, anyone's legend who, despite losing to JDG, they bounced back to completely stomp Weibo in 2-0 fashion. And despite, again, losing that head-to-head, you're second most confident in them in terms of the LPL. Tarzan far and away looking like the best jungler as we thought, and just what this team's able to do as a 5-man unit like we saw all throughout 2025. We're starting to see it warm up here in 2026. It's nowhere near what the top LPL squad is doing in Billy, and playoffs will be another thing, but right now they seem pretty unmatched within the LPL, especially Knight absolutely giga stomping every mid lane matchup so far.
That's how you know the LPL is truly back, is when your boy Knight is putting together some of these highlight level performances that you want to start talking about. BLG jumping up in here. This is one that I think I'm going to feel the pain of all year round, thinking that this wasn't going, this was going to be the implosion. It was going to be the...
It's still possible in playoffs.
It is possible, but I think what I'm seeing so early from this BLG team, not only Knight, of course, in the mid lane, but the other aspects of this team really firing off. Yeah, I'm willing to say early on, I think that one's going to go in the garbage category for predictions right away with the way that BLG has put themselves at the very top of the LPL.
And still not enough to be at the top of the rankings because the LPL is such a mess below them, and we know that the tippity top of the LCK is very familiar faces. Gen G taking that top spot. They completely destroyed KT Rolster. Kind of took turns who was popping off game to game. Keen had a fantastic Rumble game. Canyon, this jungle meta looks like he is renewed again as one of the premier junglers in the LCK. And Ruler dials back the clock as well in some of this. But the more surprising one is the level T1 is at right now, because LCK Cup makes them think it's international. I don't know. Doran's popping off on a Kali. Faker looks like it's playoffs. This team is peaking too early.
It's the Kespa Cup vibe, man. That's what it is. It's the buff coming through for these squads. They've never felt this good to start a year, getting this type of performance out early. But in all seriousness, I think it is important to talk about where I think it is good for Gen G to reclaim and really kind of solidify themselves again at the very earlier part of the year to be that number one. And I think has been a resounding, a pretty clear answer throughout their games and their focus that there is absolutely a shift compared to what happened last year. And finally, maybe this is the time where you can get it done on the international stage. But on the international stage, you will run across T1, and that is because of the way that they are playing so far. Very much so, in championship level of form, and I will say number one guy I want to be singling out on it is, of course, the new guy in Pays, and how fantastic he has been in seamlessly joining this team in the bot lane specifically with Kyria, but as well, Owner. And he has been a big part of why T1 has been able to be the dominant presence that they have been able to be throughout these clutch series. And I think that, again, showing the improvements that we saw from him last year throughout the regular season to now and getting it really early, these are good signs for T1.
And I really wonder if, the pressures of being on T1 have all but been eradicated for Owner. I felt like early on in his career, the expectations were so high for him and he'd have some suspect games and you heard the backlash from the fans. But now, obviously winning 3 Worlds really helps. But even just getting praise for his individual play, and now he's got a new contract for multiple years. I feel like there's a weight off his shoulders, and it absolutely shows on his games on the Rift. But pretty solidly convinced that if T1 maintains even close to this level, they'll be alongside Gen G near the top of this table, and we know BLG will also be, at least until their inevitable collapse in playoffs, be in that top 5. But that is it today for League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you. Absolute beauties. Thanks for hanging out.